On Ascendia Airlines Flight 101, a gleaming Boeing 707 set for a transatlantic voyage from New York to London. A storm was brewing inside the cabin, far more turbulent than any weather pattern over the Atlantic. For senior flight attendant Tiffany Davenport, it was just another Tuesday. She moved through the cabin with a practiced, icy grace, her smile a carefully constructed mask. When her eyes landed on the woman in seat 24B, that mask tightened with disdain. A black woman dressed in a shockingly vibrant, custom-made tracksuit, looking utterly out of place in premium economy. Tiffany saw a problem to be managed, a passenger to be put in her place. What she couldn't see, what she would soon learn, in the most brutal and public way possible, was that she wasn't judging a passenger. She was judging her new boss, and the final verdict on her own career was about to be delivered from 35,000 feet. The John F. Kennedy International Airport was a symphony of organized chaos, a living, breathing testament to human mobility. Suitcases rumbled across polished floors. Like a low-grade earthquake, announcements echoed in a dozen languages, and the scent of Starbucks coffee and anxious sweat mingled in the air. Amidst it all, a woman sat on an unforgiving plastic chair near Gate C26, a portrait of stillness in a sea of motion. Her name was Dr. Alistair Vance, though no one here knew that. To the bustling crowds, she was just another traveler. At 48, she possessed an aura of quiet intensity. Her face, framed by meticulously sculpted locks threaded with a few distinguished strands of silver, was free of makeup. Her eyes, the color of rich dark soil, missed nothing. They scanned the departure board, the frantic families, the jaded business travelers, and the airline staff at the gate, especially the staff. Alistair was not on vacation. She was not visiting family. She was going to work, undertaking the most critical first task of her new, unannounced position, executive chairman of the board for Ascendia Airlines. Just 3 days prior, the board, in a desperate move to salvage the airline's foundering reputation and plummeting stock, had quietly and unanimously voted her in. She was a legend. In the corporate turnaround world, a woman known as the architect for her ability to rebuild companies from the inside out. Her PhD wasn't in business administration, but in organizational psychology. She didn't just look at spreadsheets and profit margins. She studied the soul of a company, its culture, its people. And Ascendia's soul, she suspected, was unwell. The airline was plagued by a litany of complaints, abysmal customer service, endemic staff, morale issues, and a series of viral videos showcasing passenger mistreatment. The previous chairman, a legacy hire named Robert Harrington, had favored cosmetic fixes and PR spin over substantive change. Alistair's approach was the polar opposite. She believed you couldn't fix a crack in the foundation by painting over it. You had to go down into the basement with a flashlight and a hammer and see how deep the rot went. This flight was her flashlight. Her choice of attire was a deliberate part of the experiment. She wore a tracksuit of stunning, almost defiant vibrancy. One leg was a bold canary yellow, the other a deep royal purple. The jacket was a mirror image. It was not a cheap, off-the-rack garment. It was a bespoke piece from a small, fiercely independent, black-owned design house in Brooklyn, made from a revolutionary, sustainable bamboo silk blend. It was more expensive than most of the business suits in the lounge, but its value was coded in a language of cultural pride and modern luxury that many she knew would be unable or unwilling to read. To the uninitiated, it looked loud, perhaps even ghetto. That was the point. Anonymity was her shield, and her outfit was a carefully calibrated test of perception. Completing the look was a worn, buttery, soft leather satchel, a gift from her late father, its value sentimental rather than branded. She watched the Ascendia Gate agents. A man with a weary slump to his shoulders, a young woman who seemed genuinely cheerful. Then she saw her, the senior flight attendant, who was clearly in charge of the cabin crew preparing to board. She was tall, blonde, and moved with an air of proprietary authority, her uniform worn like a suit of armor. She corrected a junior colleague with a sharp, whispered word and a dismissive flick of her wrist. Alistair logged the interaction, a small, silent data point. When boarding for premium economy was called, Alistair joined the line. She kept her head slightly down, projecting an air of someone who was perhaps a little intimidated by the travel process. As she reached the podium, she handed her boarding pass to the blonde flight attendant. "Seat 24B, the woman said, her voice crisp and cool. Her name tag read Tiffany. Her eyes flickered over Alistair's tracksuit, a barely perceptible tightening at the corners of her mouth. It was a micro-expression lasting less than a second. But for a student of human behavior like Alistair, it was as loud as a shout. It was a cocktail of surprise, disdain, and judgment. "Have a good flight, Tiffany," said the words, automatic, devoid of any warmth. She handed the pass back, her fingers recoiling as if Alistair's hand might stain hers. Alistair simply nodded, her expression neutral. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm and even. She walked down the jet bridge, the low hum of the aircraft growing louder. The first interaction was complete. The first crack in the foundation had been noted. She was no longer Dr. Alistair Vance, the architect of corporate turnarounds. She was the woman in 24B, the woman in the colorful tracksuit. And for the next 7 hours, she would be a silent, watchful passenger, gathering the evidence she needed to either save her new company or condemn it. The test had begun. Stepping into the cabin of the Boeing 777 was like stepping into Tiffany Davenport's personal kingdom. For 10 years, this pressurized tube of metal and recycled air had been her domain. She didn't see it as a mode of transportation. She saw it as a stage, and she was the perpetually leading lady. Her seniority gave her power, a currency she cherished and wielded with precision. She believed in order, in standards, in the clear delineation between the served and those who serve. In her mind, the price of a ticket bought you a seat, not respect. Respect had to be earned, and it was primarily earned by looking the part. When she saw the woman in the garish tracksuit, again settling into 24B, an aisle seat, in the premium economy cabin, a fresh wave of irritation washed over her. Premium economy was her least favorite cabin to work. It was a space of ambiguity, passengers who paid extra to feel superior to economy but lacked the quiet, moneyed decorum of business class. They were often, in her opinion, the most demanding. And this woman, with her loud outfit, and what Tiffany perceived as an air of misplaced confidence, seemed to embody everything she disliked. Alistair, meanwhile, was methodically settling in. She placed her worn leather satchel under the seat in front of her, observing the details of her surroundings. The slightly frayed edge of the seat fabric, the faint, sticky residue on the tray table latch, the strained, tired faces of the other passengers. She heard a quiet sigh from the seat next to her, 24A, occupied by a young man in his early 20s who was already lost in his headphones. Tiffany began her pre-flight sweep of the cabin, her eyes scanning for compliance, and more importantly, for infractions. Her gaze snagged on Alistair's small carry-on roller bag, which Alistair was now attempting to lift into the overhead bin. It wasn't particularly heavy, but the angle was awkward. She was struggling slightly. This was a classic service moment, a small, easy opportunity for a flight attendant to build rapport and offer assistance. Tiffany saw it. She was 2 feet away. She made eye contact with Alistair for a brief moment. Instead of offering help, she turned to the passenger behind Alistair, a white man in a wrinkled blazer. "Sir, can I help you find your seat?" she asked, her voice suddenly warm and solicitous. The man pointed further back. 28G, just heading there now." "All right, have a wonderful flight," she chirped, completely ignoring Alistair's ongoing quiet struggle. It was a deliberate, pointed snub. Alistair finally managed to hoist the bag into the bin, her movements controlled, betraying no frustration. She sat down and buckled her seatbelt, her face a mask of placid neutrality. Inside, however, the psychologist was at work, dissecting the moment. This isn't about laziness, she thought. This is an assertion of dominance. She is communicating that I am not worthy of her assistance. The uniform is her status symbol, and my tracksuit, in her eyes, negates mine. A junior flight attendant, a young man with kind eyes and a name tag that read Ben, noticed the exchange from a few rows back. He started to move toward Alistair, an instinct to help written on his face, but Tiffany caught his eye and gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was a clear command. "Stand down. Not our problem." Ben hesitated, a flicker of conflict on his face before retreating to the galley, looking troubled. Alistair saw that too. Another data point. An unwilling accomplice. As the plane finished boarding and began to push back from the gate, Tiffany's voice came over the PA system, guiding passengers through the safety demonstration. Her tone was rote-board, the words spoken 1,000 times before. But as she walked through the cabin for the final check, the performance resumed. She shared a brief, warm laugh with a couple in row 22. She adjusted a pillow for a gentleman in row 23. When she got to row 24, she paused. She looked down at Alistair, her eyes sweeping over the purple and yellow tracksuit once more. "Make sure that seatbelt is tight," she said. Her voice was flat, but the implication was sharp as a shard of glass. It wasn't a polite reminder. It was an order delivered with the condescension one might use for a child. "We wouldn't want you bouncing around." Alistair simply looked up at her and pulled demonstratively on the belt. "It's secure, thank you." Tiffany's lips thinned into a bloodless line. She had expected a different reaction, perhaps indignation, a snappy retort, something that would give her an excuse to escalate to put this woman firmly in her place. Alistair's calm, unshakable politeness was more infuriating than any argument. It was like punching water. It gave her no purchase. She moved on, but the seed of a personal vendetta had been planted. This passenger was a disruption to her carefully curated world order, not because she was loud or demanding, but because she refused to be categorized and dismissed as Tiffany intended. The aircraft roared down the runway and lifted gracefully into the New York sky. As it climbed through the clouds, heading east over the vast, dark Atlantic, Alistair wore the Vance settled in for the long haul. The initial mockery had been subtle, a series of calculated omissions and condescending tones, but she knew this was just the beginning. Tiffany Davenport was not the type to let things go. The pressure in the cabin was building, and Alistair knew with a certainty that chilled her that this flight was destined for turbulence long before they reached the coast of Ireland. The true test of character for everyone involved was about to begin. The first 2 hours of the flight passed with a deceptive calm. The cabin lights were dimmed, the drone of the engines a hypnotic lullaby. Most passengers were immersed in movies or trying to sleep, but in the ecosystem of Flight 101, a cold war was being waged in the Isle of Premium Economy. Alistair had requested a simple glass of water. Ben, the junior flight attendant, had brought it promptly, with a small, apologetic smile, as if to atone for his earlier inaction. Alistair had thanked him warmly, making sure to use his name, a small gesture of recognition that made Ben stand a little taller. Tiffany observed this from the galley. The sight of her subordinate being friendly with 24B was to her a minor act of treason. She decided it was time to reassert the proper hierarchy. Her opportunity came during the meal service. The options were chicken with orzo or a vegetarian pasta. Ben was working his way up the aisle from the back of the cabin, while Tiffany started from the front. They were meant to meet in the middle. When Ben reached Alistair, he smiled. "Good evening. Would you prefer the chicken or the pasta?" "The chicken, please," Alistair replied. "Of course." As Ben turned to get the tray, Tiffany arrived, her cart blocking his path. "I'll take this row, Ben," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Why don't you go check on the beverage stock in the rear galley?" It was a pointless errand, a clear dismissal. Ben, looking flustered, had no choice but to obey. He gave Alistair a helpless glance and retreated. Tiffany turned to Alistair, her professional smile plastered on. "Now what was it you wanted?" "The chicken, thank you," Alistair repeated patiently. Tiffany feigned looking over her cart. "Oh, I am so sorry," she said, her tone utterly insincere. "It seems we've just run out of the chicken. We only have the pasta left." It was a blatant lie. Alistair could clearly see at least 4 more chicken dishes sitting on the lower rack of the cart. The passenger in 24A, the young man with the headphones, was now watching the interaction, having pulled one earbud out. Alistair held Tiffany's gaze. "I see. The pasta will be fine then." She refused to give Tiffany the satisfaction of an argument. She would not be goaded into becoming the angry black woman that Tiffany's prejudice was so clearly trying to provoke. She would simply be the observer, documenting everything. Tiffany slammed the tray down on Alistair's table with a little too much force. Then, as she moved to serve the passenger across the aisle, the real escalation happened. With a movement that was just a little too clumsy, a little too theatrical, her elbow knocked Alistair's freshly poured cup of water. Cold water cascaded directly into Alistair's lap, soaking the vibrant purple fabric of her tracksuit. "Oh my goodness," Tiffany exclaimed, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. "I am so clumsy. Look at what a mess I've made." But her eyes, which she thought were masked by the performance, held a glint of malicious triumph. Alistair sat perfectly still for a moment, the cold water seeping through her clothes. This was the turning point. An accident could be forgiven. A deliberate act of humiliation could not. Before Alistair could even speak, a man's voice, firm and laced with authority, cut through the air from the row behind. "That was no accident. I saw you. You did that on purpose." All eyes turned to seat 25C. The speaker was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a sharply tailored suit. He looked like the kind of man who was accustomed to being listened to. This was Arthur Sterling, a retired private equity magnate, who flew this route monthly. Tiffany spun around, her face a mask of outrage. "Sir, I have no idea what you're talking about. It was a simple mistake." "I have excellent eyesight, young lady," Mr. Sterling retorted, his voice low, but carrying immense weight. "I saw you look at her lap. I saw you position your arm, and I saw you knock that cup over." It was a disgusting and childish display. The cabin was now electric with tension. Other passengers were murmuring, their screens forgotten. Tiffany, flustered and exposed, fell back on her training. She saw Alistair not as a victim, but as the source of the problem. She rounded on her. "Ma'am, I apologize for the spill," she said, her voice now hard and accusatory. "But there's no need to have your friends cause a scene." "I don't know this man," Alistair said, her voice dangerously quiet. Tiffany ignored her. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper meant only for Alistair. "I don't know what your game is. Maybe you're trying to get a flight voucher or a free upgrade by making trouble, but it's not going to work with me. People like you are always trying to work an angle. People like you." The three words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was the quiet part, said out loud, the core of her prejudice laid bare. Alistair slowly took a napkin and began to dab at her wet trousers. She looked up at Tiffany, and for the first time, she let a fraction of the ice in her soul show in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something far colder, far more absolute. It was the look of a final judgment being passed. "Could I please have some napkins and a blanket?" Alistair asked, her voice betraying no emotion. The confrontation had attracted the attention of the lead purser, a man named Gregory Finch, who was a close friend of Tiffany's. He bustled over, an expression of annoyance on his face. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, directing the question not to Alistair or Mr. Sterling, but to Tiffany. "This passenger, Tiffany," began pointing at Alistair, "is becoming disruptive after a small, accidental spill," and she gestured to Mr. Sterling, "is making baseless accusations against my crew." Gregory didn't even look at Alistair. He accepted his friend's version of events without question. He turned his dismissive gaze on Mr. Sterling. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to remain calm. We are in the middle of a flight." He then looked at Alistair for the first time, his eyes flicking over her damp, colorful outfit with the same contempt Tiffany had shown. "Ma'am, we will get you a blanket. I suggest you try to enjoy the rest of the flight quietly." There was no apology, no offer to move her to a dry seat, just a command to be quiet and compliant. He was validating Tiffany's behavior, reinforcing the toxic culture from a position of leadership. Alistair nodded slowly. "A blanket would be appreciated." Ben returned with a blanket and a stack of napkins, his face pale with distress. "I am so sorry," he mouthed silently to Alistair as he handed them to her. She gave him a brief, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. She wrapped the cheap, scratchy airline blanket around her waist, a temporary fix for a problem that was anything but. The meal was ruined, her clothes were soaked, and she had been publicly humiliated and then dismissed. The data collection was over. Now she had a full-blown case study. She had found the rot in the foundation, and it was deeper and more venomous than she had ever imagined. The rest of the flight to London would be a quiet, cold, and calculated wait. The storm hadn't passed. It had simply gathered its strength, ready to make landfall the moment they touched the ground. The remainder of the flight was a study in frigid professionalism. Tiffany and Gregory avoided aisle 24 as if it were contaminated. All of Alistair's subsequent requests for a cup of tea or a simple pen were handled by the visibly nervous Ben, who treated her with the kind of deferential respect one might afford a queen in exile. Alistair, for her part, was a model of composure. She accepted the blanket, sipped her tea, and opened her worn leather satchel. From it she removed not a novel or a magazine, but a slim, unmarked, leather-bound journal and a Mont Blanc pen. Mr. Sterling, in the seat behind her, noticed the quiet elegance of the items, a stark contrast to her flamboyant tracksuit. He watched as she began to write her script, neat and precise. She wasn't journaling her feelings. She was writing an incident report, a deposition, and a corporate restructuring plan all in one. She noted the time of each offense, the exact words, used the names on the badges: Tiffany Davenport, Gregory Finch, Ben Carter. She detailed the institutional failure, the purser's immediate defense of his subordinate without investigation, the weaponization of customer service protocols to humiliate rather than help, the clear violation of Ascendia's own and legally mandated anti-harassment and anti-discrimination policies. As the plane began its final descent into London Heathrow, a sense of grim finality settled over Alistair. Tiffany and Gregory stood near the galley, laughing and chatting, confident in their victory over a troublesome passenger. They had closed ranks, their shared version of the story already solidified. They were the victims of an unruly, entitled passenger who was fishing for compensation. When the seatbelt sign chimed off at the gate, Alistair remained seated. She let the eager passengers in front of her disembark. Mr. Sterling paused as he passed her row. He leaned in slightly. "For what it's worth, ma'am, your composure was remarkable. I hope you file a formal complaint. That was the worst displays of service I've witnessed in 40 years of flying." Alistair looked up at him, offering a small, genuine smile for the first time. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Your intervention was noted and appreciated. May I have your card?" Surprised but impressed, he handed her a heavy cardstock business card. "Arthur Sterling, Sterling Capital Advisory." Alistair slipped it into her pocket. "Your perspective may prove very valuable," she said cryptically. She was one of the last to leave the plane. As she passed the galley, Tiffany and Gregory were standing by the door, bidding passengers farewell with plastic smiles. When they saw Alistair, their smiles vanished. Tiffany couldn't resist one last parting shot. "Hope you managed to get that stain out," she said, her voice low and dripping with scorn. Alistair didn't break her stride. She simply looked Tiffany Davenport directly in the eye and said in a voice that was perfectly calm, yet carried the chilling weight of impending consequence, "Oh, I will. I assure you, every stain is about to be thoroughly cleaned." She walked down the jet bridge, not towards baggage claim, but towards a discreet door marked Crew Operations. A prearranged airport official was waiting for her. He did not see a woman in a damp tracksuit. He saw the name on his manifest and immediately straightened. "Dr. Vance, welcome to London. A car is waiting for you on the tarmac." An hour later, Alistair was not in a hotel room. She was in the top-floor boardroom of the Ascendia Airlines global headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel overlooking the London skyline. She had showered and changed in a private executive suite, the offending tracksuit carefully bagged as evidence. She was now dressed in a razor-sharp, dark grey bespoke suit, her hair immaculately styled, the worn leather satchel replaced by a sleek briefcase. She looked every inch the corporate titan she was. She had made one phone call to David Chen, the company's chief legal officer, and another to Maria Flores, the head of human resources. The subject line of the emergency calendar invite she sent to the entire C-suite was simple: urgent operational integrity review. 9:00 a.m. Mandatory attendance. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the executives filed into the boardroom, their faces a mixture of confusion and irritation at the sudden summons from a name they didn't yet know. They saw a poised, powerful black woman standing at the head of the table, her presence commanding the entire room. "Good morning, Alistair," began her voice, the same calm, even tone she had used on the aircraft. "For those of you I have not yet met, I am Dr. Alistair Vance. As of 72 hours ago, I am the new executive chairman of this company's board." A wave of shock and murmurs rippled through the room. "I believe in practical diagnostics," She continued, silencing them with a look. So for my first official act, I flew here from New York on one of our own carriers, Flight 1, which landed less than 2 hours ago. I did not fly in business or first class. I flew in premium economy under a different name to experience our product as a regular customer does. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. I am not here to talk about seat comfort or the quality of the in-flight entertainment, Alistair said, her voice hardening. I am here to talk about the corrosive, bankrupt, and potentially litigious culture of contempt that is being actively fostered by our senior cabin crew. For the next 20 minutes, she recounted the events of the flight. She spoke with the dispassionate precision of a prosecutor, laying out an airtight case. She named Tiffany Davenport. She named Gregory Finch. She described the snub over the luggage, the lie about the meal service, the deliberately spilled water, the whispered slur, people like you, and the purser's immediate cover-up. She concluded by mentioning the kindness of the junior attendant, Ben Carter, and the intervention of a respected passenger, Arthur Sterling. When she finished, the room was utterly silent. The executives looked horrified. This wasn't an anonymous complaint on Twitter. This was their new boss, a corporate legend who had been subjected to this treatment firsthand. Maria Alistair said, turning to the head of HR, I want flight attendant Tiffany Davenport and purser Gregory Finch pulled from their return flight. I want them in this building by noon. I also want flight attendant Ben Carter brought here separately. Inform him he is not in any trouble. She turned to the chief legal officer. David, I want you to start drafting termination papers for Ms. Davenport and Mr. Finch. For cause, gross misconduct, violation of corporate anti-discrimination policies, and willful creation of a hostile environment for a passenger. I also want you to begin outlining a complete overhaul of our customer service and bias training effective immediately. This is not a suggestion. This is its first directive. The unveiling was complete. The quiet woman in 24B had revealed herself. And for Attendant Airlines, the day of reckoning had arrived. The ground had been shaken, and Alistair Vance was about to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. At 11:45 a.m., Tiffany Davenport and Gregory Finch walked into the Attendant corporate headquarters. They had been pulled off their layover schedule with a curt summons to a mandatory debriefing. Annoyance, not fear, was their primary emotion. They sauntered into the reception area, complaining to each other about the inconvenience, assuming it was a new, pointless procedural change. Tiffany had already mentally composed her scathing report about the disruptive passenger in 24B. She was confident, secure in her seniority, and her friendship with Gregory. They were escorted to a small, sterile conference room on the executive floor. The air was thick with an unnerving silence. When the door opened, they saw Maria Flores, the head of HR, and David Chen, the chief legal officer. And sitting at the head of the table, impeccably dressed in a power suit that cost more than their monthly salaries combined, was the woman from seat 24B. Recognition dawned on Tiffany's face, but her brain couldn't process the context. The tracksuit was gone, replaced by impenetrable corporate armor. The mild, passive demeanor was gone, replaced by an aura of absolute authority. Ms. Davenport, Mr. Finch, please take a seat, Alistair said. Her voice was ice. They sat down hesitantly, confusion warring with a dawning sense of dread. I believe we were on the same flight from New York this morning, Alistair began. Flight 1, you may remember me from seat 24B. Tiffany's mouth went dry. Gregory shifted in his chair, his usual bluster deflating like a punctured life raft. I am Dr. Alistair Vance, she stated, letting the name and title hang in the air. the new executive chairman of Attendant Airlines. The color drained from Tiffany's face. She looked as if she'd been physically struck. Gregory seemed to shrink into his uniform. The entire horrifying reality of the situation crashed down upon them in a single, brutal moment. Every snide remark, every dismissive gesture, every act of calculated cruelty from the flight replayed in their minds. But now, it was cast in the terrifying glow of their new reality. They hadn't been putting a low-class passenger in her place. They had been abusing the most powerful person in their entire company. I arranged this meeting, Alistair continued, her tone clinical, because I believe in clarity. I want you to understand precisely why your careers at this airline are ending today. She looked at Tiffany. Ms. Davenport, your behavior was not a simple case of poor customer service. It was a malicious, targeted campaign of harassment based on what I can only assume was a deep-seated prejudice informed by my race and my choice of attire. You deliberately withheld assistance. You lied about meal availability. You intentionally spilled water on me in an act of petty aggression. And you insulted me with the phrase "people like you," a classic, unambiguous indicator of racial bias. Tiffany opened her mouth to speak, to form a defense, but no words came out. A choked, pathetic squeak was all she could manage. Alistair shifted her gaze to Gregory. Mr. Finch, you are in a leadership position. Your duty when a conflict arises is to investigate and de-escalate. Instead, you did neither. You took your friend's side without question, dismissing a credible complaint from another passenger. You failed to offer any meaningful assistance and, in fact, became complicit in the harassment by attempting to silence me. You did not lead. You enabled. You are not a leader. You are a liability. David Chen, the legal officer, slid 2 envelopes across the table. These are your termination notices, he said grimly, effective immediately. Your dismissal is for cause, meaning you will not be eligible for a severance package. We have documented evidence of gross misconduct and violations of federal and international air carrier regulations regarding passenger discrimination. We strongly advise you against contesting this. Tiffany finally found her voice, a high-pitched, desperate whine. You can't do this. It was a misunderstanding. I've been with this airline for 10 years. I have a perfect record. Your record is irrelevant. Alistair cut in, her voice sharp as a scalpel. Your 10 years of service did not prevent you from treating a passenger with contempt. In fact, your seniority likely made you feel untouchable. It made you careless. You are the embodiment of the cultural rot I have been hired to excise from this company. Your 10 years are not a defense. They are an indictment of how long we have allowed this poison to fester. Gregory, pale and sweating, tried a different tactic. Dr. Vance, ma'am, I am so sorry. I made a terrible judgment call. Please give me a chance to make it right. Retraining, a demotion, anything. The time for making it right was at 30,000 feet, Mr. Finch. Alistair replied coldly. You had your chance and you failed spectacularly. Your judgment call was to protect a bully instead of a passenger. That is not a correctable error. It is a fundamental flaw of character. Security will escort you both from the building to collect your personal effects from the crew lounge. Your access badges have already been deactivated. Defeated, they slumped in their chairs. The hard karma had arrived, swift and merciless. It wasn't just the loss of their jobs, it was the public, undeniable branding of their character. They were not laid off. They were fired for bigotry and incompetence. After they were escorted out, a young man was shown into the room. It was Ben Carter. He looked terrified, convinced he was next. He stood awkwardly by the door, wringing his hands. "Mr. Carter, please come in. You are not in trouble?" Alistair said, her voice softening for the first time. Ben approached the table cautiously. "I was the woman in seat 24B, Alistair said gently. "I saw what happened. I saw Miss Davenport wave you off when you tried to help me with my bag. I saw you were trying to serve me the meal I requested. I saw the look on your face after the spill, and I received your silent apology. You showed integrity and empathy in a situation where you were under pressure from your seniors to do the opposite." Ben looked at the floor, overwhelmed. I should have done more. I should have spoken up." "You were in a difficult position," Alistair acknowledged, "but your instincts were correct. And in the new Attendant Airlines, those instincts will be rewarded, not punished. Ms. Flores and I have reviewed your file. You have excellent performance reviews and a passion for service. We are promoting you effective today to a training leadership position within the cabin crew. You will become one of the faces of our new service initiative, helping to teach other flight attendants the very empathy you displayed naturally." Ben's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Me, a training leader?" "Yes," said Alistair. "We are rebuilding this company's culture from the ground up. We need builders. We need people like you. And we need people like Mr. Sterling." She held up the business card. "He will be invited to join our new customer advisory board. We will listen, we will learn, and we will change. This incident is not something we are going to bury. It is going to be our foundation." The reckoning was over. For Tiffany and Gregory, it was a brutal end. For Ben, it was an unthinkable beginning. And for Alistair Vance, it was the first painful but absolutely necessary step in transforming Attendant Airlines. She hadn't just fired 2 employees. She had fired a signal flare that a new era had begun. The old ways were over. Judgment would now be based on character, not credentials, on actions, not appearances. 6 months after the fateful transatlantic crossing, the soul of Attendant Airlines was being reborn in a brightly lit training room at their Heathrow operations hub. The air smelled of fresh paint, new carpets, and a faint lemony scent of industrial cleaner, the aroma of a fresh start. This was the headquarters of the Vance Initiative, the now legendary corporate overhaul that had become the talk of the aviation industry. At the front of the room, standing before 20 new hire flight attendants, was Ben Carter. The transformation in him was profound. The nervous, hesitant young man from Flight 101 was gone, replaced by a leader who wore his training supervisor's uniform with a quiet, earned confidence. He wasn't loud or bombastic. His authority came from a place of genuine conviction. "Your uniform gives you authority," Ben explained, his eyes scanning the eager, youthful faces before him. "It makes people listen. It gives you control in an emergency." But what Dr. Vance has taught us, what this entire company is now built on, is the principle that authority is not the same as superiority. He clicked a button, and a new slide appeared on the large screen behind him. It showed 2 columns, transactional service and relational service. For years, Attendant, like many airlines, practiced transactional service. The passenger gives us money, we give them a seat, from A to B. A drink, a meal, a blanket, all transactions. But that's not enough. It creates an environment where we see passengers as tasks to be completed, not people to be cared for. Where does that lead? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. A young, keen-looking trainee in the front row raised her hand. "It leads to shortcuts, cutting corners on the human element." "Exactly, Maria," Ben said, with an encouraging smile. "It leads to seeing a struggling passenger not as an opportunity to help, but as an annoyance. It leads to making assumptions based on what someone wears, how they speak, or the color of their skin. He leaned forward, his expression serious. It leads to Flight 101. The story was now a core part of the training curriculum, presented as an anonymous case study. Ben walked them through it, moment by painful moment. He detailed the senior attendant's choice to ignore the passenger with the luggage. He explained the psychology behind lying about a meal choice, how it was a petty play for power. He described the accidental spill not as a clumsy moment, but as an act of targeted humiliation. The purser's failure was just as great, Ben continued. He took one look at the situation: a senior colleague he was friends with and a passenger who didn't fit his idea of premium, and he made an assumption. He chose his tribe over his duty. That single choice validated the harassment and made the company legally and morally culpable. A hand went up in the back, a young man with a slightly skeptical look. But with respect, what if the passenger was just trying to cause trouble for a freebie? We hear about that all the time. It was the question Ben was waiting for. That's the most important part, he responded patiently. Even if you suspect that which is an assumption you should avoid, your procedure remains the same. De-escalate, assist, document, and maintain professionalism. The senior attendant on Flight 111 did the opposite. She escalated. She withheld assistance. She documented nothing but her own prejudice. The passenger in this case remained calm and polite throughout. The crew were the ones who were unprofessional. Your job is to be the calm center of any storm, not the lightning. Unseen by the class, the door at the back of the room had opened silently. Dr. Alistair Vance stood there, out of the trainee's line of sight, listening. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her presence unassuming. A small proud smile touched her lips as she watched Ben command the room. He wasn't just repeating a script, he embodied the change she had envisioned. He was the new culture. The results of this new culture were reverberating far beyond the training room. The Wall Street Journal article, "The Chairman at 30,000 feet," had become a sensation, a modern business fable. It had triggered a tsunami of positive press. Ascendia's stock was up 35%. Passenger satisfaction scores were the highest in the airline's 50-year history. Employee retention had dramatically improved. People wanted to work for a company that stood for something. The new marketing slogan, "Dignity at 35,000 feet," was proving to be more than just words. Alistair's customer advisory board, chaired by a delighted and fiercely engaged Arthur Sterling, had already implemented a dozen passenger-suggested improvements, from better family boarding procedures to more diverse in-flight entertainment options. But for every triumphant ascent, there is a corresponding devastating fall. The hard karma that had hit Tiffany Davenport had not been a single swift blow, but a slow, grinding erosion of her life. She stood now in the grimy crew lounge of Sunchaser Charters, a cut-rate carrier that was the punchline of the airline industry. The room smelled of stale coffee, burnt popcorn, and desperation. Her new uniform was a cheap, ill-fitting polyester that chafed at her skin. Her flights were brutal red eyes to sun-bleached tourist traps filled with rowdy bachelor parties and screaming children. The authority she once commanded was gone, replaced by the constant need to placate drunk passengers and enforce carry-on baggage fees with the ferocity of a toll collector. The final crushing humiliation came during a layover in Orlando. As she walked through the terminal, she saw a group of Ascendia crew members looking sharp and proud in their newly redesigned, higher-quality uniforms. Leading them laughing and talking with her team was a former colleague of Tiffany's named Jessica, who had recently been promoted to purser. Tiffany called out, her voice uncertain. Jessica turned, and her professional smile faltered for a second as she took in Tiffany's appearance, the cheap uniform, the tired lines on her face, the dullness in her eyes. Tiff. Wow, I didn't know you were flying out of here, Jessica said, the awkwardness thick between them. Yeah, well, we all have to work, Tiffany said, a bitter edge to her voice. Sun chaser. It's a job. She looked at Jessica's crisp new uniform, the silver purser's pin gleaming. So you got Gregory's spot, huh? Must be nice. Drinking the corporate Kool-Aid. Jessica's face hardened slightly. It's a different company now, Tiff. It's better. The Vance Initiative, it's real. Oh, please, Tiffany scoffed, her voice rising. The Vance Initiative is just PR spin. I know what happened. I was set up. Your precious Dr. Vance came onto my flight in that ridiculous clown suit looking for a fight, and she got one. She wanted to make an example of someone, and it was me. It's not fair. Jessica looked at her old friend, and for the first time, she saw her not as a colleague, but as a stranger, a relic of a bygone era. No, Tiff, she said, her voice quiet but firm. That's not what happened. I went through the training. I heard the case study. She gave you a dozen chances to be a decent human being, and you failed every single one. You weren't set up. You were revealed. You did this to yourself. With a final sad shake of her head, Jessica turned and led her crew away, leaving Tiffany standing alone in the middle of the concourse, trembling with a rage that was indistinguishable from despair. She pulled out her phone, a nervous, self-torturing habit she had developed, and checked Ascendia's stock price. It was up another 2 points. A wave of nausea rolled over her. She was blacklisted a pariah, while the company she felt had betrayed her was soaring to new heights. The world had moved on, and she had been left behind in the wreckage of her own creation. Miles away in her London office, Alistair Vance stood before a tall, unmarked closet. She opened it. Inside, hanging alone, in a breathable garment bag, was a single outfit. A tracksuit, one leg, canary yellow, the other royal purple. It had been professionally cleaned, the water stain long gone, but its symbolic power remained. It was her corporate mace, her touchstone. She thought back to that flight. The humiliation had felt real, the anger a hot coal in her stomach. But her training in psychology, her entire life's philosophy, had allowed her to channel it, to observe, to diagnose. This tracksuit, which Tiffany had seen as a marker of low class, was in a way a gift from her late father. He had been a mechanic, a man with grease-stained hands and an unshakable belief that you judged a person by the integrity of their work and the kindness in their heart, never by the clothes on their back or the car they drove. Character is what you are in the dark, Alistair, he used to say. On Flight 101, she had been in the dark, anonymous, stripped of her titles, and she had seen the true character of her crew. The experience hadn't just been a test for them, it had been a reaffirmation for her. It reconnected her, the executive chairman, to the raw, visceral experience of being powerless and prejudged. It was a lesson she vowed never to forget. Her intercom buzzed. Dr. Vance, the board is ready to review the Q3 employee profit-sharing proposal. I'm on my way, she replied. She closed the closet door. The tracksuit was out of sight, but its lesson was at the forefront of her mind. She hadn't just fired 2 people and promoted another. She had performed radical surgery on a diseased culture. She had proven that a company could be both highly profitable and deeply humane. The reckoning had been severe, the karma absolute, but the result was a new ascendancy, built not just on balance sheets and flight schedules, but on a simple, revolutionary principle: dignity. The fall of Tiffany Davenport and the rise of the new Attendant Airlines is more than just a story of satisfying karma. It's a stark, powerful reminder that what we wear is never as important as how we treat each other. It's a lesson in the destructive power of prejudice and the incredible strength of true character. Dr. Alistair Vance didn't just fire a bad employee, she surgically removed a cancer from her company and proved that leadership isn't about sitting in a corner office, it's about understanding your people from the ground up. Her story is a testament to the idea that true authority comes from integrity, not a name tag. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that character is more important than couture, then please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this powerful message. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss another story of real-life drama and the profound lessons they teach. What did you think of Alistair's methods? Were they brilliant or too extreme? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one.